Hey everyone!
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mind Trippers, for joining into our first episode. If you don't know, our episode tonight is on loss and grief. And as coaches, I know, it's our job to travel the road less traveled, right? And to go down the path less traveled. And with that, of course, we're going to touch base on the topics of death and the loss of relationships. But more importantly, I think that we are going to take you on a journey this evening on all the different ways we can experience loss and how that grieving process can show up in your life.
So just to introduce ourselves, I am Taylor Bryant, and this is Nikki Katsaounis, and you guys are joining us in on this show, obviously the Mind Trippers, where we kind of discuss the connection between mental health and the different mindsets that we have. So again, like she said, today we're jumping in with loss and grief and kind of talking to you guys about the different ways, the subtle ways and the very, very obvious ways that it shows up in your life.
So I want to start out with a little bit of a quote to kind of get us all on the same page. And I think, if anything, the overarching theme for this evening is you will dream a new dream. And what that means is, loss is, again, not just something that is taken away from us physically, as in a person, but loss can be the loss of, the loss of a career, the loss of expectations. And I'll let you delve into that. But, part of grieving is learning how to dream new dreams. And what does that look like? And what does that mean?
I think so many people, and you can probably share some of your clients and stuff, so many people experience loss and grief. And when I first became familiar with the topic, I was just thinking like loss is very associated with death. Somebody important in your life has passed away, or like a loss of a relationship. People go through divorces or lose a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend. But there's other ways that loss can show up in your life. And I think one of the biggest ones, especially what's going on now with coronavirus, is just kind of like that loss of normalcy. Like people pre-coronavirus, we would wake up, we had our routines, our daily behaviors, our patterns. We just knew what we were going to do. And now we've kind of lost that sense of normalcy, or we're trying to find brand new ways to feel secure in our life.
Oh, I love that you just said that. Sorry. That made me think, do you remember that C.S. Lewis quote that says, "No one ever told me grief felt so much like fear." And I think that's something, like you said with coronavirus, it's the fear of the unknown and that uncertainty.
Right. And then fear often resembles grief and loss, for sure, because when you lose something, you just don't know what's happening next. You just don't know, like, especially if you lose a spouse, right? You just don't know, like, where's that financial stability going to come in from? Where's that security going to come in from, especially if there's no life insurance? So that can be a super scary feeling.
So in going back to that topic of you will dream new dreams, firstly, so the goal of today is to just be cognizant of all the different ways we can experience loss, and we'll give some examples, and then we can talk more about the grief process. But we were talking with someone who we interact with through Bryant Katsaounis mindset coaching, and we were just talking to this woman a few hours ago, and she has a daughter who was born, it's her first child, who was born with some pretty significant mental and physical health concerns. And we coach people like this all the time of this mother grieving the loss of not being able to have her child walk down the aisle because she's not physically able to walk. And so I think, when you're pregnant and you, especially when it's your first, you have these ideas of what it's going to be like to be a parent and what little minor accomplishments that all children accomplish. And then when you get
like walking the stage at graduation, or
any of those major life events,
driving a car.
And so when that is taken away from you, that is a loss. You may still physically have your child and you will love them just the same as what you always would have, right? You're going to go through life, you're going to move upward, you're going to adapt, but it's the loss of what you expected. And loss shows up in so many different ways like that.
I think some of the common ways that we see loss show up is somebody's just experiencing depression, They're very sad. They're very down. Maybe it is somebody who is filled with anxiety, and there's just that fear of, oh, I can't go out and do this. I've lost somebody at that place, so I can't make myself go there. Or maybe it's just like staying away from other people because there's that fear of, and I know with coronavirus, like I'll just talk about myself. I just have this fear like that somebody in my life is going to get it and then pass away. Like that's been a common theme that's in my mind.
Loss of your security.
Yeah. And that really, really scares people.
Mm-hmm. And so another way that you all may be experiencing loss and grieving that you may not have known, the loss of, have any of you ever felt that you look back in your life, right, despite what age you are, looking back at where all the accomplishments you made, being like, wow, I thought I was going to be further ahead at this point. It's the loss of what your own expectations that you had for yourself.
I want to say that is a common theme, right? Like so many of us, the quote you said earlier, dream a different dream. So many of us, like as children, grow up saying, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a marine biologist. I think I wanted to swim with dolphins. I don't know. I was very into water. But like all of us have like these dreams. And then sometimes we just wake up and we're like, man, I'm not where I wanted to be. And that can be a sense of loss too. Like some people I know are just super into going to school and they want to be lawyers or doctors or what have you, but they haven't made that jump into education or getting into a training program that allows them to dream that dream they've always had. And then because they're not in that space, they feel a certain sense of loss, like the loss of expectations.
And I think, the crappy thing about, I'm going to say society, and especially in Western culture, is that we expect grief, one, that you can only grieve over certain things. Well, it's okay to grieve if your spouse dies, but you can only grieve for 3 days because that's how much most paid PTO gives you, right? Or it's okay to grieve the loss of your parent for 2 PTO days and then it's over.
Right.
Not only do we put a time limit on loss and grief, but we can only expect it to grieve certain events. And like you said, it's the loss of what you wanted to be for yourself.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're not happy.
Right.
That doesn't mean you haven't adapted. That doesn't mean your life is bad, but it's still a loss. And if we don't grieve properly, then it shows up, like you said, in that depression or anxiety, anger, like all these nasty, icky ways that are not conducive to a healthy life.
I want to jump back into what you said.
Yeah.
So somebody passes away, yes, your jobs will give you bereavement. If it's like a long distant cousin, they give you 2 or 3 days. If it's
that,
right? If you're lucky. Yeah. If it's a spouse, they give you a week, but it's almost as if you're expected to experience a major loss and move on. Like, it's like, okay, well, you've been like, hello, Nikki, like you lost him like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Like, why are you not moving on yet? Like, come on.
And, with that, you just mentioned a trigger word, moving on. Not only are we told to move on, what I hear a lot of, especially when I went to a friend's wedding recently, she had gotten remarried after her spouse had passed away. I don't know, maybe it was like 7-8 years ago that her spouse died. But her mother, like I was talking to her mother in the wedding, and her mother said, I'm so happy my baby girl moved on.
Ouch.
And I think that is such an important thing to know. And if anyone takes anything out of our show this evening, it's we do not move on from grief, nor should we. We move upward, meaning we adapt, we learn healthy coping skills, but that grief will always be with us.
Right.
And that is normal, and it should always be with us. It's okay to love the loss of someone who's passed away, let's say a husband, and still love new husband. Or it's okay to still be grieving the loss of the career you thought you'd have for yourself and still have a better career, or one that you're so happy with. It's still a loss that you have to grieve.
It's almost as if also what I'm hearing you explain, and many people probably feel this as well, it's an either or situation. So if you're grieving, let's say, let's just go with the example you have. If you're grieving the loss of a spouse, it's either, man, I got to be sad and depressed all the time, or move on. Man, I have all this self-pity, so I need to keep myself down, or be happy. Like, it's not an either or. It's kind of like, and I love what you said earlier, it's kind of like a vacuum. Like, grief is a vacuum.
It doesn't happen
in a vacuum. Like, grief encompasses so many other emotions, and just because you are experiencing a loss doesn't mean you don't have the right to still be happy.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I think too, you know, let's say talking with that example we gave of you have a child that has a disability, okay? Yes, they make new momentous accomplishments for their capability, and they reach milestones. It may not have been the same as what you expected, but it's a day to celebrate.
Right.
But what you also have to remember is, like you said, grief doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can celebrate accomplishments and still grieve the fact that, wow, this wasn't what I was expecting. Doesn't mean I'm not proud, doesn't mean you're not happy, doesn't mean you're not grateful. And I think, like you said, we expect grief to be and or. Right. So if you're grieving, you must be sad, depressed, and not grateful for what you have. Or if you're grateful and happy, well, then you must have moved on. No. No other emotion. You know, I gave this example, Taylor. Let's say you have a baby, right? And you know I'm going to be like,
in a couple of years,
your biggest supporter, right? So, you know, on your child's 10th birthday, Auntie Nikki over here is not going to be like, you still having birthdays for this thing? Like that event was 10 years ago you had this baby with, I'm over it. No, so when there's feelings like joy, we want to celebrate it for a lifetime. We know it's a part of our life. So when it's positive feelings, it's okay to continually go back to that initial event, right? The birth of a child, we never forget that. We have parties about it every year, like it's a thing. Right. But if it's an event that caused loss or grief, all of a sudden it's like 10 years later, you haven't moved on? Why? What's going on? That's weird. We don't want to, you know, we shut those people out, and it's not okay.
It's not. And that kind of reminds me of the conversation we had a little bit earlier on loss and grief and how people treat it like a to-do list. Like, okay, and I know, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the 7 stages of grief, but that even can be looked at as like a to-do list. So you've got the anger, fear, uncertainty, denial, all those mixed into that. And it's kind of like once you reach the end of the 7 stages of grief and you still are grieving a loss, you're like, well,
what's wrong with me?
Yeah. What's next? Like, how do I continue to move on past this? It's not a to-do list, guys. It's not a to-do list. Grief can and will and stick with you, right? It will stick with you as you move up in life, as you move into different phases of life, as you move into a new relationship. You're still going to sense some of that grief there, but it's how you deal with it and how you bring it into your life and tackle it.
And I think, you know, when you said that, I know you're probably tired of hearing me use this quote.
You're the quote girl today. Normally it's me.
I know. But one we've often used in our coaching sessions is grief is like glitter. And especially for those of you who have kids, you know that glitter never goes away, right? But you get a handful of glitter and you throw it up into the air. It's New Year's Eve celebration. It can be October the following year. And after you've cleaned your house 1,000 times and you're vacuuming, you'll find pieces of glitter in between a couch cushion, stuck on your hand somehow. You're like, how did this piece of glitter end up on my shirt from 2 years ago when I went to this party? Like, glitter, no matter how much you clean and you do, it will not go away. And grief is like that, because grief is a healthy part of life. It is healthy to grieve properly. And so grief is like glitter. It can be that initial exploding event and it's big and it's in your face, but months and years later, you will still find that little piece of sparkle show up in the most unexpected of places. And that's when I think society doesn't give people the support they need to give. Right. It's like when you're cleaning up those glitter pieces.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because you said like it explodes and it carries on with you throughout the years. Research on loss and grief does show that you typically sit in those feelings for about a year, but many of you who have experienced any type of loss, whether it was, you know, a spouse or a child or a friend, or if you've lost a job in that type of way, sometimes it sticks with you much longer than a year. And I think it's really important for you to go easy on yourself. Be kind, be compassionate, engage in self-care, because if you stick around in grief, it can cause you to be bitter sometimes. It can really cause you to be resentful about certain situations. So like you said, again, I just like how you mentioned, you know, move up. Figure out how to blend that in with your life and help yourself be better. Help yourself grow.
And you kind of alluded to this, like So if you hang on to grief in an unhealthy way, it shows up in your life in some way, right? And I just think about too, let's think of someone who has had a tumultuous childhood and had traumatic childhood. Whether we talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse, anything of that nature, children of adult alcoholics, right? There's so much trauma in so many different ways. And when you have a traumatic childhood or you've been physically violated, there's the loss of trust, safety, innocence, the loss of what a parent should be, the loss of what a childhood should be, the loss of being able to have the joys of a childhood because you're not in a place to be able to do that. And it does not matter how successful you become, what field you get into, what healthy relationships you now have in life because you went to therapy and everything is okay and great. Those pieces of glitter from the loss of a safe and secure childhood will always show up. Always show up.
And that's probably one of the realest things ever that you could mention. Many people like to put up a wall, or they like to bury the seed, if you will, bury the seed of trauma or whatever that loss is, and they do their best to avoid it. But as you guys know, like when you avoid things, they always somehow find their way back. Maybe like you said, in the form of glitter in the corner over there, like stuff like that always finds its way back. And that's why it's so important to allow yourself to feel that emotion of grief. You got to allow yourself to live in that feeling for however long you need to. But I want to caution you and say there is probably a point where it can be too long and it's going to have some devastating effects on your mental health, on your behaviors, and how you feel.
And a prime example of that too would be, so we do business coaching and we have a lot of clients. For example, we had a woman come in who could not overcome the fear of being able to advertise her business on social media because of the things that her mother had told her growing up about how she looked. And she just could not get over that mindset barrier. She's like, I'm not going to do social media. I'm not going to post pictures of myself. People won't like me. They won't come to me because I'm not attractive. And that was that loss of having a safe and secure childhood that showed up in her business 30 years later. And we don't think about that. We don't connect those two things because, like you said earlier, everyone expects grief to happen in a vacuum, and it doesn't.
Right. It shows up in all different areas of your life. And I just kind of think that's how unresolved trauma or unresolved life experiences happen anyway. So many of us experience a loss and we just keep it moving. Just keep it moving. You got the blinders on, okay. I lost my house.
Or we don't even know we lost something because it's not a normal thing to lose.
But you keep the blinders on, and then that ends up down the road. You're like, damn, why am I so depressed? Or why am I feeling like I can't achieve something? Or why am I always wallowing around in self-pity? Like, why do I throw these pity parties for myself? Or a big one, why am I always negative? How come I can't sit in front of a friend who is telling me about all these positive things in her life without judging her as being negative?
That's a big one.
It shows up in so many different ways.
And so, I think the first step for all of you listening is to take a minute to reflect on what have I lost that I haven't grieved on because I didn't even know it was a loss. Right? We have the obvious losses, but what are you grieving that society hasn't proven to be acceptable or hasn't been talked about, and so you've never grieved it because you didn't know it was okay to grieve that. And I think the first step is just identifying what have you truly lost in yourself. What if it's for those who've recently been through a divorce, or what if it's the loss of identity, how you used to be? I know you have a client on that right now.
Yeah. When you lose your identity, it's kind of like, wow, now what? Like, some people are really hardcore on their labels and what they are in life. I'm married, I'm a therapist or a life coach or business coach, whatever. I am a family person, I'm this, I'm that. But when we lose that, you like, it's like a deer in headlights, like, what's next? What's happening now? And a lot of us tend to push blame off on somebody else. It's somebody else's fault that I lost this. And it's kind of what I touched on a little bit earlier. But when we shove that blame off on somebody else and don't give ourselves time to sit in that grief or that loss and validate our own feelings, we become bitter and resentful. And we don't trust other people again. And any new person that comes into our life, you put that wall up because there is that grief that you have never dealt with. maybe your prior spouse did some crazy things to you, and he's the one that, or she, sorry, they are the one that caused those feelings in your life and destroyed your life. You gotta give yourself time to understand, like, okay,
what role did you play
what
in it?
role did I play in this, for one, right? But like
meaning too, but like what role is it to deal with my own thoughts, feelings, and actions?
Yeah.
Right?
You got to learn how to grow through that so that you're not somebody who's resentful and bitter.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, firstly, like we said, identify things that you've lost that may not be obvious, or maybe they are, doesn't matter, but identify all of your losses.
What would you say are some subtle ways, some subtle losses?
I think the subtle losses are, we kind of talked about this, but one, the loss of someone who's still alive.
That's a big one.
Meaning you have a child that, for whatever reason, did not meet your expectations, or like you had mentioned, the loss of what I thought I would be in life. And you had mentioned the labels, and I think that leads into the point of the second thing to do to grieve healthily is to not attach ourselves to X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Like, I am not a coach, I'm not a mom, I'm not a wife. And that sounds like, I think people put up a barrier because, like, well, we have to be attached to something. I am someone's daughter, I am this. But when you can just be full and satiated and complete and saying, I am, and that's it, I just am.
That's big.
Right? I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not a perfectionist. I'm just someone who's always loud. Quit attaching a label to whatever you may be. I am.
That's a big quote, I feel like.
Thank you.
Yeah, right? And that's the quickest way in life, I feel like, to experience some type of loss is when you just attach all those labels to yourself. I am this. What happens if something changes the next moment? Because, life, everything is basically uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen the next moment. What if all of a sudden that label's taken away from you?
Right.
Then what? How do you move forward? I think some other subtle ways that we experience loss is like that loss of safety. I'm thinking of a friend who recently shared on social media that she experienced somebody trying to break into her house. Now, to me, I feel like loss of safety is super impactful. It's scary. When you lose the sense of being able to be safe in your own home, you may start to show some of those symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as like hypervigilance. You're always like looking out your window and making, oh, who's that? Who's that? What is he doing? What's he trying to do? Having flashbacks. Maybe that event was so scary for you. So now you have this loss of safety. You're supposed to be in your home. We're supposed to be able to come and relax and enjoy yourself and have a good time. But now it's kind of like you're hypervigilant. Like I said, you're just always thinking about what's happening next and how to protect yourself. You got to allow yourself to grieve things like that as well, a loss of safety.
And so you brought up a great point. So for those who are keeping, a total of like how to kind of healthily grieve, you're going to identify losses. You are going to, after you've identified those losses, something else that we want to be sure that we do is to, you know what, go ahead, because I want to formulate that thought for a minute.
Okay. I think what you were saying, like another step is just to finally identify somebody that you can talk to. On the tip of avoidance, a lot of us will just keep those thoughts and feelings inside of our heads, and we're forced to go through life feeling sadness, feeling grief, feeling like we're alone, but there's always somebody there. Hopefully, there's always somebody there in your life that you can just open up and share your feelings to, and they can help guide you through that. They can help put you back on that path of, self-love, help work through that grief. Because a lot of times too, when you share your story, somebody else out there needed to hear it. That can be life-changing for somebody else as well. Somebody else can help heal through that loss.
And being able to put down that shield of vulnerability, like you had said, first of all, like I think we all need to make a pact that if we know someone's grieving, we're not going to ask them if they're okay unless we're truly interested in the answer. I know if I'm experiencing a loss and someone asks if I'm okay and they're like passing me in the hallway, like, do you even care if I'm okay? Like,
Yeah.
And then two, I think we need to promise ourselves that to be honest, like you said, to really share in, if you're not okay, no, I'm not okay. and to not judge if it's something important or not.
Yeah.
For the woman that you're just speaking of, whose house was broken into, hey, I'm grieving this loss of my safety. I'm freaking worried. Like, no, I'm not okay. I haven't slept in 4 days.
Right.
And to not minimize your experience and
Right.
to embrace it fully of like, you know what? This may not be the biggest loss I've ever experienced. It may not be the deepest feelings of grief, but I'm still going to acknowledge that and share that. Because if not, when we say it's fine, not only are we doing a disservice to us,
Right.
but we're doing a disservice to everyone else, because then we think that, you know, it puts the pressure on them to be like, well, I have to say I'm fine too. If this girl just went through this and she feels okay, then certainly I'm not okay to complain about my little minor loss.
Right.
And it ends up hurting all of us.
So for those of you who are watching, please drop some comments in below. What type of losses have you experienced? What questions can we answer for you? Again, there is no loss that's insignificant. Death probably is one of the biggest losses that anyone can experience in their lives, but please, if you've lost a career or if you've even lost your sense of safety, that is something that's super impactful, and you can't just sit in that and feel unsafe or feel sad, lost, depression. You can't feel that way for the rest of your life. So share with us the different type of things that you may have lost in your life, and we would absolutely love to help guide you through some of those feelings and help you learn what's next.
And I think too, to remember that if you are grieving in any kind of way, or maybe you didn't realize you were grieving until you listened to this and you're like, oh, you know, I lost something and now I'm freaking sad about that. Thanks a lot. We're here to always motivate you and bring you up. But I think it's also important to remember, you know, like we said, grief does not happen in a vacuum. You can be devastated about something and still laugh.
Right.
Right. You can have this loss over your childhood and still be successful and happy. And I think too, just to be able to experience grief and it's not a negative emotion.
Right.
And we can't experience joy without having really experienced some kind of grief.
Right.
And so to be able to embrace that fully is really important.
It's super important. So guys, how do you, or how can you, or what are some things that you can do to start that path of healing? Group therapy can be very, very helpful. There are different types of groups in this area online now, especially with coronavirus, where there's people experiencing similar losses, similar grief as you. And I think it can be powerful to connect with somebody else who has a similar story to you. And that way you guys can share your thoughts and feelings in an open space, lose that feeling of being judged, and just be like, hey, I'm honest, this is what I lost, and this is what I need help with.
It looks like we have a question coming in, so I'll give my answer, and then feel free to give your answer. Someone asked the question, if you feel numb after multiple deaths in your family, what is this a sign of? Should I be concerned about not feeling anything because I'm numb? So to answer the first part of that, it's not a sign of anything. It's you experience multiple deaths. Should you be concerned, I feel is, you know, kind of an open question. But you know, I think part of what we as a society should be concerned about is that we are expected to put on this shield.
Right.
And what I'm guessing is you're feeling numb because you were raised in such a way that, you know, the more we can bounce back after a loss, the stronger we are in strength, and you have this armor. And that we are also taught it's not okay to be vulnerable, because that's when we get hurt.
Right.
So that I'm guessing over time you've learned to build this wall and this shield, and that, you know, you're not intentionally trying to be numb. I think it's just probably an accumulation of having gone through so much in life that this is your body's natural response. So that being said, although it's not intentional, no, it's not the healthiest, right? I'm not concerned in the sense that, you know, there's gonna be this huge detrimental effect, but you're doing such a disservice to yourself. Your body has such a, think of how many losses you've had to experience that your body's now numb. That's not okay.
And I was going to say that numb is also, it can be a common reaction to loss, especially if you experienced a lot. And that's something that shows up with trauma as well. People who have been through complex trauma, such as many losses of people who were super close to you, meant the world to you. Even to what you were talking about earlier, some a trauma or abuse in your childhood. Sometimes it's a protection mechanism or a defense mechanism to just numb yourself. If I know that this loss happened to me, I recognize it, but I'm going to numb my emotions to it and keep moving. That's a defense mechanism for yourself. I would be a little bit worried that it might show up in other areas of your life. Like, what other areas of your life are you numbing? What other areas of your life are you not feeling or stealing joy from yourself because you're not allowing yourself to feel?
And to get a little bit scientific about that, so you might be sitting there thinking, I don't know who you are or what's happening right now, but you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not trying to be numb. I want to feel and I can. So our brains are this really complex and amazing organ that we literally don't understand at all. Like the things that we know are just really the tip of the iceberg. But what we know is that over time, our brains develop, they fire neurons and they develop paths. And it's kind of like a deer in the woods. Like our neurons will always take the most beaten down traveled path because it doesn't want to have to tear down that new brush. And so it automatically goes to its natural, easiest path, the path of least resistance. And so when we experience enough losses over time, whatever coping mechanism we did in the beginning, which was probably unhealthy because we're not good at anything the first time we do it generally, right? We started, the more losses that happened, we started going down that same path. And what's fascinating is that as we do CBT or coaching or anything like that where we're changing the brain function, if you get an MRI pre and then post treatment, you can literally see different parts of your brain light up. And that's because you're finding those new paths, those paths you haven't traveled down as much. So what I'm guessing too is you feel numb because that's been your automatic response for so many years that your brain doesn't remember how to tear down the forest and find new paths again.
And for those of you who may experience loss after loss or anything in your life that is causing you to feel feelings of numbness, I would challenge yourself to sit down with yourself tonight if you can, before bed, 15 minutes if you got kids, lock yourself in the shower, 15 minutes, whatever you need to do. Feel. Allow yourself to grieve what has been lost in your life. Validate those feelings. Give yourself some compassion.
And it might not even be, I would even say, don't even necessarily think about the losses of all the deaths you've had. Because your brain's going to take that path of least resistance. So maybe,
push through that.
And so maybe you need to think about the loss of something else, Darn, I'm like locked myself in the shower because I don't even get 15 minutes a day. Start small, like start grieving, like
loss of independence, right?
Yeah, the loss of privacy. Like, come on, we cannot take away the importance of privacy, right? But if your brain is taking the path of least resistance, you might not be able to start out with those big things. So take those little steps of initiating that pity party just to feel, just to sit in that for a minute so that you can work yourself up to like, oh, this is the stuff I've been avoiding for a while.
That can be, difficult too, because that requires you to bring down the wall you've built up brick by brick. You got to take it down until you can understand, like, wow, I can feel. These are the emotions that have been behind my numbness this whole time. Because I'm pretty sure if you're numbing in some areas, your emotions may be showing in a different way. Maybe it's showing in anger. Maybe numbness is the tip of the iceberg for you, but beneath the iceberg, there are feelings of anger, or there are emotions of like sadness. Are you just feeling depressed all the time?
I also think too, sorry, I just wanted to
like I had a thought and then I lost it.
Well, I was thinking too, because I'm assuming this person has resistance, which you may not, but for those of you who may be feeling resistant in what we're saying of like, why would I want to sit in those icky feelings? Like, you're not giving me a good reason. And so I like to think about too, and I'm going to steal this story from Brene Brown, right? Who's a research psychologist that we spend a lot of time, working with. But to think about why it's important to sit in those uncomfortable, icky, vulnerable feelings is that, when we arm ourselves up, I think about like a gladiator going to the ring in Roman times, right? You got your chest piece and your helmet and your sword and all your stuff. And like, that's cool for battle. That stuff will protect you. Awesome. But like, you are not always in battle. Your life is not a constant battle. So we need to have that armor when we need it to be safe. But the problem is what happens is when we have enough attacks against us, we get too scared. Like we talked about earlier, we have that fear and we learn to keep the armor on because it's safer. Like, I don't want to feel hurt again, right? And so what happens though, if you were a soldier walking around in your everyday life, fully armored up, like think about eating or helping your kids, like how uncomfortable, like we get stuff like you can't function properly And that's where so many of us are living. That's why you feel numb. It's that armor. I'd rather feel numb than feel pain. I'd rather feel this than that. And we arm ourselves up to the point that it does start disrupting your everyday life.
And I was going to say, like, even that armor like that you're referencing is heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It's heavy. You're walking around all day with loss and grief on your shoulders. There's intense, persistent stressors that are happening in your life, and it's heavy. And sometimes people may feel the more armor they add, the more protected and the better that they feel. But just think about that. It gets heavier and heavier and heavier, and you're just weighed down. So like you said earlier, maybe you can't just jump into feeling if you've been numb for some time, but it's about desensitization. Start small.
Taking piece by piece.
Take piece by piece, yeah. Start small. Start with something that you feel like you can deal with at this moment. And then once you can conquer that challenge, validate your feelings and say, or sit in that moment and say, okay, how did I feel? Recognizing that. And if you feel good, can tackle the next one until you can get to the biggest thing. And behind that numbness and stress and grief, there's happiness and sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, if you will.
And when there's not, it's not, and that's okay.
And yeah, right. But I want everyone to know that if you're struggling with loss and grief and don't know what next, there is beauty on the other side of that.
And I think too, this is going to sound so simple, but really, grief, like we said, doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can be happy and sad at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's nothing wrong with you. That's life.
Right.
And you can want to experience grief sometimes and avoid it. And the thing is, grief does not happen on a to-do list, right? It's not like a checklist of symptoms. For the person who emailed us, like, should I be concerned? It's not about that. Like, I think even placing that puts so much pressure. Like you said, it gets heavy.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, a big takeaway too is whatever you feel right now is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not X, Y, and Z. You're not a label. Like, you are who you are, and you're feeling what you're feeling. And in this moment, that is good enough.
Mm-hmm. You allow yourself to be human, I think, is another big takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to allow yourself to be human. Like, you have to feel some way in your life.
And in taking that oath of, not asking other people if they're okay, if you're not willing to listen to their answer,
yeah.
For all of us being honest in our answers, like, yeah, I'm fine, or like, no, like, you know what, I'm happy today, but overall life sucks. Cool, like, that's okay. And remember, grief is like that glitter. Like, it's going to keep showing up. We do not move on from it, nor should you try to move on from it. And until you fully embrace all that glitter that sneaks up and shows up, and until you're ready to be honest with yourself, things aren't going to get better.
Right. So I want to take a couple seconds here and ask, does anybody else have any other questions as it pertains to loss in their life? That was a really good question. I'm sure so many people do feel numb and experience that. So thank you for opening up and sharing your question.
And instead of feeling concerned, I want you to flip that mindset, because that's a very, I don't want to say negative mindset, but it comes from a place of not being able to grow. Like, should I be worried? Oh no, like, listen. So maybe just flipping that too of, you know what, I experienced so much loss and I'm not okay with where I'm at. And I'm super excited to grow from this loss. I'm super excited to move upward from this loss. So instead of worrying about being concerned, just place it under, like, I am excited to move in a different direction with my grief.
Mm-hmm. So we also have another question here. For viewers in Central Pennsylvania, how can we work with you? Do we go through our insurance or contact you directly? So unfortunately, the state of Pennsylvania does not allow us to accept insurance for life coaching. So it is private pay, but we do offer many different types of packages that are going to be a specific fit to your individual needs that have, just different prices that you can work with.
Yep, and so you can reach out to us directly. Firstly, you can go to our website at visiondrivencoaching.com, or you can email us at info, @visiondrivencoaching.com, and we can respond within about 24 to 48 hours.
Because of coronavirus, we are utilizing Zoom. That's actually what we normally do, but we do in-person sessions with people upon request. But because of coronavirus and we're following the safety guidelines of Governor Wolf here in Pennsylvania, we are doing Zoom video conferencing. Only, yes. So guys, if you feel like you need to have a deeper conversation about loss and grief, or you just weren't able to or ask a question to us on this live here, please shoot us a email and we will be able to set up a consultation with you and kind of explore what you need a little bit deeper.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mind Trippers, and we cannot wait to see you next week.